My name is Sloane, and I'm 32 years old. The moment my father announced my brother as the new CEO of the company I built from nothing, I felt my entire world crack open. I was sitting at that polished conference table, surrounded by board members who wouldn't meet my eyes, watching Dad smile at Trevor like head just handed him a trophy head earned. 10 years of 18-hour days, of sacrificing everything, of turning a dying business into a $50 million empire, and it all meant nothing because I wasn't born a son. But what they didn't know, what nobody in that room could have guessed, was that I held every single key to the kingdom they thought they were stealing from me. Before I tell you exactly how I walked away with everything that mattered and left them with nothing but an empty shell, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments, because I want to know where my story is reaching. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever built something only to watch someone else take credit, hit that like button right now. Subscribe, because what happens next is going to show you exactly how to take back what's yours. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a house where business was religion and tradition was law. My father, Gerald, owned a textile import company that had been bleeding money for as long as I could remember. Every dinner conversation revolved around shipments, suppliers, and the slow death of a business model that hadn't evolved since 1985. My mother used to try to steer conversations toward anything else, but she died when I was 19, and after that, there was nothing to soften the edges of our family dynamics. Trevor is 3 years younger than me, and from the day he was born, he was the golden child. Not because he did anything remarkable, but simply because he existed as a son. Dad gave him allowances, paid for his car, sent him to business school without blinking. Meanwhile, I worked 3 part-time jobs to pay my way through Portland State University because Dad said I should learn the value of money. The irony wasn't lost on me even then. Trevor learned the value of having everything handed to him, and I learned that nothing would ever be given to me just because I was family. By the time I graduated with my business degree, Dad's company was losing $200,000 a year. The business was stuck in the past, dealing with outdated suppliers and refusing to acknowledge that the world had moved online. I watched it happening, studied the industry, and saw an opportunity that everyone else was missing. Sustainable textile technology was exploding, and eco-conscious fashion brands were desperate for suppliers who could meet their standards. I put together a business plan on nights and weekends, detailed projections showing how we could pivot the company and turn it around in 18 months. I must have rewritten that presentation 50 times, making sure every number was perfect, every argument airtight. When I finally worked up the courage to show it to Dad, I was 23 years old and genuinely believed that a good idea would speak for itself. He barely looked at the first page before pushing it back across his desk. Women don't understand manufacturing, Sloane. This is a relationship business, and clients want to work with someone they can relate to. He didn't say the quiet part out loud, but I heard it anyway. Someone male. Someone like Trevor, who at that point was working as a junior salesman and contributing absolutely nothing except showing up late and leaving early for golf. I didn't give up. I kept refining the plan, kept researching, kept finding more evidence that this pivot would save the company. 6 months later, the bank threatened foreclosure, and suddenly Dad was willing to listen. But his agreement came with conditions that should have told me everything I needed to know about how this story would end. I could run operations, he said, but Trevor would be named co-director. My brother had just finished business school with mediocre grades and zero real-world experience, but he was going to share my title because Dad needed to maintain the appearance that his son was involved in saving the family business. I swallowed my pride, told myself it didn't matter what the titles were as long as I could do the work, and accepted terms that I should have walked away from on day one. Trevor showed up 2 hours late on his first day. He had coffee with someone, he said, like it was a reasonable excuse. He left at 3 in the afternoon for a golf game with college friends. Meanwhile, I was making calls to suppliers at 7 in the morning and answering emails at midnight, rebuilding relationships that had deteriorated under years of neglect. I attended every trade show within driving distance, cold-called sustainable fashion brands, and slowly, painfully started to turn things around. The first major client I landed was a boutique eco-fashion brand in Seattle. They were small, but growing, exactly the kind of partner we needed to prove our model worked. The contract was worth $180,000, enough to keep the company from going under while we built momentum. I negotiated every term, managed the relationship, ensured delivery was flawless. We celebrated at a family dinner, and Trevor told Dad that Head helped close the deal by making an introduction. It was a complete lie. Trevor had never spoken to anyone at that company. But Dad beamed at him like Head just won the Nobel Prize, and I sat there silently, telling myself that the work mattered more than the credit. I hired a small team of 5 people who believed in the vision I was building. Every single one of them was loyal to me, not to the company name or the family legacy, but to the actual mission of creating sustainable textile solutions. And I developed something that would later become the foundation of everything. A proprietary eco-dyeing process that used 70% less water than conventional methods. I spent months in our facility, working with chemists and engineers, testing and refining, until we had something genuinely innovative. By the end of year 1, the company broke even for the first time in 5 years. We weren't profitable yet, but we weren't sinking, and in business, sometimes staying afloat is the first victory. I remember looking at those financial statements and feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The belief that maybe this could actually work, that maybe my contributions would eventually be recognized for what they were. I was so naive. Year 2 was when everything changed. I landed a partnership with a mid-tier athletic wear brand that was trying to improve their sustainability profile. They needed exactly what we offered, and I'd spent months building a relationship with their procurement director, learning their needs, customizing our approach. When the contract was signed, our revenue jumped to $3.2 million. The company went from barely surviving to actually growing. I was working relentlessly. Product development meetings at dawn, client calls during lunch, operations reviews in the evening. I was managing every aspect of the business that actually mattered. While Trevor's role seemed to consist entirely of attending fancy dinners and playing golf with connections that never led anywhere. Dad started praising Trevor at family dinners for growing the business, talking about his son's natural talent for leadership. I would sit there, fork halfway to my mouth, wondering if we were living in the same reality. But I stayed focused. I hired someone who became more than just an employee. She became the first real friend it had in years. Jenna joined as our head of research and development, a brilliant chemist who saw the potential in what we were building. She was the person I could talk to honestly, the only one who seemed to understand that something deeply unfair was happening in plain sight. Year 3 brought the breakthrough that would define everything. I developed a revolutionary water-free dyeing technology, something the industry had been chasing for decades. It wasn't just an improvement, it was a fundamental reimagining of the process. I filed patent applications with my name listed as the lead inventor, though the patents themselves were owned by the company. At the time, I didn't think much about that distinction. I was proud of what WED created, excited about where it could take us. The technology caught the attention of a major sportswear corporation, one of the biggest names in the industry. They wanted to partner with us, test our process at scale, integrate it into their supply chain. I negotiated a 3-year contract worth $8 million annually. That single deal transformed us from a regional player into a national contender. Our revenue hit $12 million that year. And suddenly, we were being taken seriously by competitors who'd ignored us before. Dad threw a celebration party at his house. He invited everyone, board members, key clients, suppliers, even some of his golf buddies who had nothing to do with the business. He gave a speech in his living room, holding a whiskey glass, talking about how proud he was of Trevor's leadership and vision. Trevor's leadership. Trevor's vision. I was standing in the corner by the kitchen, watching my father credit my brother for work he hadn't done, for innovations he didn't understand, for relationships Head never built. Jenna found me there and just squeezed my arm without saying anything. What was there to say? Trevor started acting like he genuinely believed Head built everything. He'd give interviews to trade publications, talking about our proprietary process like he understood the chemistry. He'd take client calls and make promises it'd have to scramble to keep. He hired his incompetent college friends into middle management positions, people who had no business being anywhere near operations. I spent half my time cleaning up their mistakes, fixing problems they created through sheer laziness and ignorance. I tried talking to Dad about it. I showed him examples of Trevor's friends causing delays, costing us money, damaging client relationships. Dad brushed it off. Your brother has good instincts about people, Sloane. You're too focused on the details. You need to see the bigger picture. The bigger picture, apparently, was watching Trevor fail upward while I did the actual work of running a company. Year 4 was expansion. I opened 3 manufacturing facilities across the Pacific Northwest, hired a VP of operations named Donovan, who had 20 years of experience and actually knew what he was doing. I was managing a team of 60 employees by that point, overseeing production, maintaining quality standards, ensuring we could meet the demands of growing contracts. Our revenue hit $28 million. We were on track to break $50 million within 2 years. And everyone in the industry knew our name. Well, they knew Trevor's name. A national business magazine ran a feature on sustainable textile pioneers, and Trevor gave them the interview. He lied about everything, claimed Head developed the water-free dyeing process, said Head built the company culture, took credit for client relationships Head never touched. The article called him a visionary CEO, printed a photo of him standing in our facility like he knew what any of the equipment did. Dad framed that article and hung it in his office. I wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not even as a footnote. Years of my life, every innovation, every relationship, every late night and early morning, completely erased by my brother's willingness to lie and my father's willingness to believe him. Year 5 was when we hit $50 million in revenue. It was validation. Proof that everything I'd sacrificed had been worth something. But that validation rang hollow when Trevor was the one getting congratulated, when Dad was telling everyone who'd listen about his son's accomplishments, when the industry saw Trevor's face and not mine. I started documenting everything. Some instinct told me to protect myself, to keep records of who actually did what, who actually knew what. I saved emails, kept copies of contracts, maintained records of client communications. I told myself I was being paranoid, but paranoia turned out to be the smartest decision I ever made. Looking back now, I can see that I was already preparing to leave. Some part of me knew, even before the betrayal became explicit, that this situation couldn't last. You can't build something with your bare hands and watch someone else wear the crown forever. Eventually, something breaks. Either you do, or the lie does. I was done breaking. Dad called an important family board meeting on a Tuesday morning in March. I assumed it was about the expansion plans I'd been developing for months, a proposal to open a West Coast distribution hub that would cut our shipping costs and improve delivery times. I'd spent weeks on the financial projections, negotiating preliminary agreements with suppliers, mapping out exactly how we'd scale operations to match our revenue growth. I arrived at the conference room 15 minutes early, carrying my presentation materials and a confidence built on knowing my numbers inside and out. Trevor was already there, sitting in Dad's usual chair at the head of the table, looking more smug than usual. Dad arrived with 3 board members, all his old friends from college and golf, who'd been given seats more for loyalty than expertise. I launched into my presentation, walking them through the distribution hub proposal. The numbers were solid. Projected cost savings of $2.3 million annually, improved client satisfaction through faster delivery, strategic positioning for future growth. The board members nodded politely but seemed distracted, like they were waiting for something else. Dad kept checking his watch. 15 minutes into my presentation, he cut me off. Well, discuss that later, Sloane. I have an important announcement to make. The way he said it, formal and rehearsed, made my stomach drop before my brain caught up to what was happening. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and smiled at Trevor. After much consideration, the board and I have decided it's time for a leadership transition. My heart actually lifted for a second. Finally, I thought. Finally, the recognition it earned. Finally, the title that matched the work. Finally, my father seeing me for what it accomplished. Trevor will be taking over as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. The words didn't process at first. I heard them, but they made no sense, like someone speaking a language that sounded like English but wasn't. Trevor. CEO. The brother who showed up at 10 and left at 3, who knew none of our clients personally, who couldn't explain our proprietary process if his life depended on it, who'd contributed nothing but a last name and a smile. Trevor was smirking, doing this little act of surprise like he hadn't known in advance. Dad was beaming at him with pride it'd never seen directed at me, not once in 32 years. The board members were nodding. These 3 men who played golf with my father and rubber-stamped whatever he wanted. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. This physical reaction, my body betraying me when I needed to be strong, when I needed to argue, to fight, to demand an explanation that made any kind of sense. Dad continued, oblivious or indifferent to my shock. Trevor has shown exceptional leadership and vision. He understands the bigger picture, has the right temperament for the CEO role. The company needs someone who can build relationships, represent us well in the industry, take us to the next level. Everything he was describing, I'd already done. Every single thing. But he was saying it like Trevor possessed qualities I lacked. Like there was something about my brother that made him inherently more suited to lead the company I'd literally built from bankruptcy. I finally found my voice. What about my contributions? I built this company. Every client relationship, every innovation, the entire operational structure. Me. I did that. Dad looked at me with something like sympathy, which was almost worse than anger would have been. Sloane, you've been a tremendous help. A help. Like I was an assistant who'd done some filing. You'll continue as Chief Operating Officer. You're brilliant with operations, but Trevor has the vision for where we need to go. It was a demotion disguised as a lateral move. My title would technically stay similar, but everyone in the industry would understand what it meant. Trevor above me, making decisions I'd have to execute, taking credit for strategies I'd develop, and the salary difference made it explicit. Trevor would make $800,000 plus bonuses. My salary would stay at $320,000. Unchanged, despite revenue growing 500% under my management. Trevor stood up and gave this fake humble speech about honoring the family legacy, about the responsibility he felt, about working together as a team. He looked directly at me during that last part, and his smile was cold. He knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just Dad's decision. Trevor had wanted this, had probably pushed for it, had been positioning himself to take credit for my work all along. The meeting ended with handshakes and congratulations. Board members clapped Trevor on the back, told him they knew he'd do great things. Nobody looked at me. Nobody acknowledged what had just happened. The casual destruction of everything I'd worked for, the erasure of my contributions in favor of nepotism and gender bias so blatant it would have been funny if it weren't my life. I walked out of that conference room in a daze. Got in my car, drove home on autopilot, sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I called Jenna, and when she answered, I broke down crying for the first time in years. Just completely fell apart, all the professionalism and strength I'd maintained for so long crumbling under the weight of such profound betrayal. Jenna came over. She brought wine and fury on my behalf. And she told me something I hadn't known, something that made everything so much worse. Trevor's been telling people he's the one who invented the water-free dyeing process. Has been taking credit for your work with clients, with industry contacts, with everyone. Has been systematically erasing you from the story of this company's success. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every decision, every moment. I'd chosen to stay silent when Trevor took credit that wasn't his. I'd told myself the work mattered more than recognition, that eventually the truth would be obvious, that merit would win out. I'd been so stupid. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to argue or beg or try to make Dad see reason. I was going to review every document, every contract, every patent, every relationship I'd built. I was going to figure out exactly what I'd created and exactly what was mine, because some clarity had emerged from the shock. The company wasn't theirs. The value wasn't in the name or the building or the corporate structure. The value was in what I'd built. And almost all of that was either legally mine or tied to me personally in ways they hadn't considered. They thought they'd won by giving Trevor a title. They had no idea what they'd just started. Trevor's first week as CEO felt like watching a child play with a loaded gun. He started changing my decisions immediately, overruling choices I'd made based on years of relationships and operational knowledge. I'd selected a supplier I'd worked with for 4 years, someone reliable and cost-effective. Trevor switched to a more expensive option because the owner was his friend from college. Just like that, we were paying 30% more for the same materials because my brother wanted to do his buddy a favor. He announced it in a team meeting, framing it as bringing fresh perspectives and new direction to the company, like the direction that had grown us to $50 million needed changing. The employees sat there looking uncomfortable, especially the ones who'd been with me from the beginning. They knew what was happening, but what could they say? Trevor was the CEO, anointed by Dad and the board. Trevor started holding weekly CEO briefings where he presented strategies and initiatives to the leadership team. I attended the first one and had to sit there listening to him describe my water conservation project as his idea. Explain my client relationship strategy as something he'd developed. Take credit for operational improvements I'd spent months implementing. He did it so smoothly, with such confidence, that someone who didn't know better might have believed him. He hired an executive coach, not a legitimate consultant who might actually help, but his college roommate Bradley, who charged us $15,000 a month to attend meetings and nod supportively. Bradley had no background in textiles, no experience in manufacturing, no qualifications beyond being Trevor's friend. When I objected to Dad, pointing out that this was a waste of money, I was told not to undermine my brother's leadership decisions. Month 2 brought the smear campaign, though I didn't recognize it as such at first. Trevor started expressing concerns about my management style in conversations with Dad and board members. "She's too emotional," he'd say. "Difficult to work with, resistant to change." He never said these things to my face, just planted seeds of doubt in private conversations that got back to me through sympathetic employees. I started getting excluded from important meetings. Client calls I'd always handled were suddenly Trevor's responsibility. Strategic planning sessions happened without me. When I asked why I wasn't invited, the excuse was always vague. Trevor wanted to handle it personally. The client requested him specifically. "We didn't want to overload you." Each exclusion was small enough to seem reasonable in isolation, but together they formed a pattern of pushing me out of my own company. Then I discovered Trevor was interviewing candidates for a VP of Operations position, my position. Nobody had told me we were hiring for that role, and when I confronted him in his new corner office with its view of the city, he had the audacity to act like this was normal. "Don't take it personally, Sloane. We just need someone more collaborative, someone who works better with the team." The implication was clear. I was the problem. Not him, not his incompetent friends, not his complete lack of understanding about how the business actually ran. Me. That's when I realized this wasn't just about favoritism or credit anymore. This was a coordinated plan to eliminate me entirely. Trevor wanted me gone, wanted to replace me with someone he controlled, wanted to erase the last evidence that I'd built anything at all. Month 3 brought the trap. Trevor assigned me to lead a special project, opening a new facility in Arizona. On the surface, it seemed like an opportunity, a chance to prove myself in his new regime. In reality, it was a setup designed to make me fail. The timeline was impossible, fully operational in 4 months when similar projects typically took 8. The budget was cut by 30% after Eid already started planning, forcing me to renegotiate contracts and scale back essential infrastructure. 2 of my best team members were suddenly reassigned to other priorities, leaving me short-staffed during the most critical phase. I worked frantically, pulling miracles out of thin air to keep the project on track. I negotiated better deals with suppliers, found creative solutions to budget constraints, put in 100-hour weeks to compensate for reduced staff. And I almost pulled it off. The project was 2 days ahead of schedule and 12% under budget when Trevor sent an email to the board expressing concerns about delays and cost overruns. Complete lies. But Head sent the email first, setting the narrative before I could present the actual facts. A board meeting was scheduled to review my project management capabilities, and the email framing made it clear. This was a trial, and the verdict was already decided. The board meeting felt like an execution. Trevor presented his analysis, cherry-picking data and outright lying about timelines and costs. He claimed the budget was 40% over when we were actually under. Said the timeline had slipped by 6 weeks when we were ahead of schedule. He showed charts that didn't match reality, threw around numbers that had no basis in fact. I presented the actual data, receipts, timelines, supplier confirmations, independent audits, everything that proved the project was successful by any objective measure. Trevor responded that these numbers didn't match what his team reported. His team being the incompetent friends Head hired, people who had no involvement in the Arizona project but were willing to lie for him. Dad looked at the conflicting information and sided with Trevor. "I'm concerned about your attention to detail, Sloane. These discrepancies are troubling. Maybe the COO role is too much responsibility right now. The board put me on a performance improvement plan. 30 days to demonstrate better project management. As if I hadn't just successfully delivered a project under impossible conditions. The humiliation was the point. They weren't actually concerned about project management. They wanted to break me down, make me feel incompetent, push me toward quitting so they wouldn't have to fire me and face the legal consequences. It was psychological warfare disguised as corporate governance, and everyone in that room knew it. I walked out of that meeting understanding exactly where this was headed. They were going to make my life so miserable that leaving would feel like relief. They were going to systematically destroy my reputation, my confidence, my will to fight. They thought they could exhaust me into surrendering what Eid built. They really didn't know me at all. Trevor's isolation tactics became more aggressive after the board meeting. He moved my office to a different floor, away from operations and the team I'd built. The official reason was space optimization, but the real purpose was separation. He wanted to physically remove me from the people who knew what I'd contributed, the employees who might speak up on my behalf. My email access to sensitive client communications was restricted. I needed Trevor's approval to contact major clients, the same clients I'd personally brought to the company and managed for years. He required me to submit daily activity reports, detailed breakdowns of how I spent every hour, like I was an intern who couldn't be trusted. It was infantilizing and intentional. Jenna came to my apartment one evening after work, looking worried. "Hess building a case to fire you. I've seen the documentation. He's keeping every tiny mistake or perceived failure exaggerated and compiled into a file. Hess going to claim you're underperforming and use it to justify termination." My allies in the company were terrified to be seen talking to me. Trevor had made it clear that loyalty to me would be punished. Then Trevor hired his girlfriend. Courtney had 30,000 Instagram followers and a lifestyle blog about sustainable living, which apparently qualified her to be our brand director at a salary of $240,000. She had no marketing degree, no corporate experience, no understanding of our industry. But she looked good in photos, and Trevor wanted her around, so suddenly we had a brand director position that hadn't existed before. I objected to Dad, pointing out that this was nepotism and a waste of resources. His response: "Be supportive of new talent, Sloane. You're being territorial." Territorial. I was being territorial about a company it built while watching my brother hire his unqualified girlfriend into a made-up executive position. The gaslighting was almost impressive. Month 4 brought the attack that nearly destroyed me. We had a major client up for contract renewal. The athletic wear company worth $12 million annually. It managed this relationship for 4 years, knew the CEO Diane personally, understood their needs and concerns intimately. Trevor insisted on leading the renewal negotiation himself. I warned him. Diane valued personal relationships and direct communication. She preferred working with people who understood the technical aspects of our process. She didn't respond well to aggressive sales tactics. Trevor ignored every warning, convinced that his natural charisma would win the day. The call was a disaster. Trevor didn't know basic details about our production capacity, made promises we couldn't keep, tried to upsell services Diane hadn't asked for and didn't need. I watched him fumble through the call, cringing at every misstep, watching 4 years of relationship building collapse in real time. Diane called me directly afterward. "What's happening over there, Sloane? That wasn't the company I partnered with. That wasn't the professionalism I've come to expect." I smoothed things over, apologized for the confusion, assured her that our service and quality wouldn't change. I saved the contract through personal intervention and relationship equity I'd built over years. Trevor told Dad that I'd gone behind his back and undermined his authority. Said I was sabotaging his client relationships because I was jealous of his position. Dad called me to his office, and for the first time in my life, I saw disappointment in his eyes, directed at me, that actually hurt. "You need to let Trevor lead, Sloane. This undermining behavior has to stop." He believed Trevor's version without even asking for mine. The false accusation came in month 5. An anonymous HR complaint was filed against me, claiming hostile work environment and inappropriate behavior towards staff. The allegations were completely fabricated, vague enough to be hard to disprove but serious enough to require investigation. I was suspended with pay during the review. Trevor sent a company-wide email about leadership changes necessary to ensure a positive culture. He didn't name me explicitly, but everyone knew who he meant. The employees I'd hired and mentored knew the allegations were garbage, but they were too scared to speak up. Speaking in my defense would mark them as targets. Jenna risked her position to come to my house during the suspension. She brought printouts of an email chain shed found accidentally. Correspondence between Trevor and Bradley discussing the HR complaint strategy. They'd planned it, coached someone to file a false complaint, worked out the timing to maximize damage to my reputation, calculated how to make it look legitimate enough to stick. The investigation took 3 weeks. They interviewed employees, reviewed my communications, looked for any evidence of the alleged behavior. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. I was reinstated with a formal letter stating no wrongdoing was found, but the damage was done. My reputation was tarnished. People questioned whether something had happened that just couldn't be proven, and Trevor had successfully painted me as a problem employee. When I returned, my role had been restructured. No direct client contact, no budget authority, no decision-making power. I was essentially a figurehead, kept around for appearances but stripped of any real function. Trevor announced an organizational restructuring, brought in an outside consultant who was, of course, his former fraternity brother Preston. Preston's recommendation surprised nobody. Eliminate the COO position, transition Sloane to an advisory role. Advisory meant no power, no team, no influence. Just a title to keep me quiet and compliant. My salary was cut to $180,000, a market adjustment according to the memo. Dad approved everything without even having a conversation with me about it. At family dinner that week, he praised Trevor's tough decisions for the company's future. Trevor raised his glass in a toast. Sometimes you have to make hard changes, even with family, for the good of the business. He looked directly at me when he said it, that cold smile on his face, and I saw the truth clearly. This wasn't business. This was personal. Trevor had resented me his entire life, resented that I was smarter and harder working, resented that I'd built something real while he coasted on Dad's favoritism. Now he had the power to punish me for the crime of being competent, and he was using it with calculated cruelty. I drove home that night in complete silence. No music or podcasts or distractions. Just me and the clarity of understanding that I couldn't stay. Not because they'd beaten me, but because staying meant accepting a version of reality where my contributions didn't matter, where years of my life counted for nothing, where being a daughter instead of a son justified any level of injustice. I'd spent 10 years building something extraordinary. And now I was going to take it with me. I spent that entire weekend locked in my apartment with my laptop, a legal pad, and 10 years of records. I went through everything systematically, making lists and checking facts, discovering the scope of what ID actually built versus what they thought they owned. The proprietary technology was mine. Not in the sense that I could just take the patents, those belonged to the company legally. But I was listed as the lead inventor on 8 separate patents, and more importantly, I'd been developing a next-generation process on my own time, using my own resources. That new process was different enough to be legally distinct, and I could file patents for it independently without violating any agreements. The client relationships were mine. I reviewed every major contract and found that 70% of them had clauses tying the agreement to the current management team. Specific language about relationship continuity, about working with designated personnel. I was named in those contracts. Trevor wasn't. If I left, those clients had contractual grounds to leave too. The key employees were mine. Not as property, but as relationships built on respect and shared vision. I'd hired Jenna, Donovan, and every other person who actually made the company function. They worked for me, not for the company name or the family legacy. If I left, I knew they'd follow. The supplier network was mine. I'd spent a decade building relationships with vendors, negotiating terms, establishing trust. Most of them worked with our company specifically because of me. They took my calls, gave us preferential pricing, prioritized our orders because of personal relationships I'd cultivated over years. I called my friend Iris, an employment attorney I'd known since college. She came over Sunday afternoon and reviewed my employment contract, looking for leverage and vulnerabilities. What she found was better than I'd hoped. The non-compete clause was likely unenforceable in Oregon for someone in my position. The restrictions were too broad, the geographic scope unreasonable, and Oregon courts had consistently struck down non-competes that prevented someone from working in their field. Iris was confident we could challenge it successfully, and even if the company tried to enforce it, the legal battle would cost them more than letting me go. The intellectual property I'd developed on my own time belonged to me. That next-generation dyeing process I'd been working on in my garage on weekends, that was mine completely. I could file patents, commercialize it, build a competing business around it, and they had no legal claim. I had documentation of everything they'd done. The false accusations, the performance improvement plan based on lies, the systematic undermining and harassment. It was a textbook case of constructive dismissal, probably with gender discrimination elements. If they wanted to fight me leaving, I had ammunition for a lawsuit that would devastate them publicly and financially. Monday morning, I went back through the client contracts with new eyes. The athletic wear company contract had a specific clause allowing them to terminate if their primary relationship manager left the company. That was me. Diane had insisted on that language 4 years ago because she wanted assurance that she'd keep working with the person she trusted. 4 other major clients had similar provisions. Collectively, those 5 contracts represented $32 million in annual revenue, more than half the company's total, and every single one of them was tied to me personally in ways that Trevor either didn't know about or hadn't considered important. I made a list of every employee I trusted, Jenna and Donovan at the top, followed by 3 senior engineers, 2 operations managers, and our head of client relations. 8 people who were essential to running the company, who knew how everything actually worked, who'd been with me through the building years. I couldn't officially recruit them while still employed, but I needed to know if they'd follow me when the time came. I scheduled coffee meetings throughout the week, casual conversations that stayed carefully on the right side of legal boundaries. I didn't make offers or ask for commitments. I just mentioned that I was considering my options, thinking about my future, exploring what might come next. Every single one of them said the same thing in different words. If you leave and start something new, I'm with you. Wednesday evening, I met with an angel investor who'd approached me 2 years earlier about funding a startup. Francine had been impressed by the technology I'd developed and wanted to back me if I ever went independent. I'd turned her down at the time because I still believed the family company could work. Now I called her up and asked if the offer still stood. We met at a coffee shop downtown. I explained the situation honestly, told her I was planning to leave and start a competing company, laid out the technology I'd developed independently and the clients who would likely follow me. Francine listened to my whole pitch and then smiled. I always knew you were the real force behind that company. I'll commit $5 million in seed funding, contingent on you being free from any non-compete restrictions. $5 million. Enough to launch a real company, not a scrappy startup. Enough to hire the team I needed, build the facilities required, compete at scale from day one. The pieces were falling into place. Thursday, I consulted with Iris again about strategy. We couldn't just quit and immediately start competing. That would invite lawsuits and give them ammunition to claim I'd violated my duties. We needed a clean exit that left me legally protected and them with no grounds to sue. The strategy Iris outlined was elegant. First, document everything they'd done wrong. Second, secure my intellectual property rights by filing the new patents. Third, give them a chance to make things right through formal complaint and negotiation. Fourth, when they refused, use that refusal as leverage to negotiate a separation agreement that released me from restrictions. Fifth, take what was legally mine and build something new. I spent Friday filing patent applications for the next generation process. The applications went in under my name, with my own money, covering technology I'd developed independently. I also trademarked a potential company name, Cascade Sustainable Textiles. It felt real suddenly, seeing that name registered, imagining what it could become. Saturday morning, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called Dad and asked for a private meeting. One last chance to make him see reason. To salvage some kind of relationship. To give him the opportunity to choose fairness over favoritism. I already knew how it would go, but I needed to try. For my own peace of mind, I needed to give him one final chance. We met at his house Sunday afternoon. I brought documentation of everything Trevor had done. The lies, the false accusations, the systematic harassment, the declining company performance under his leadership. I showed Dad the numbers proving that 3 major clients were expressing concerns about the leadership change. I presented evidence that Trevor's incompetent hires were costing us money and damaging our reputation. I offered a solution. Make me co-CEO. Share authority equally. Let me protect what I've built, while Trevor learns what he clearly doesn't know. Let's run this company together for real, not with me doing all the work while he gets all the credit. Dad looked at the documentation for maybe 5 minutes before pushing it aside. Trevor is CEO. That decision is final. I tried again, explained that the company was heading towards serious problems, that we were at risk of losing major clients, that Trevor's inexperience was showing in ways that could be catastrophic. You work for the family company, Sloane. You don't own it. Dad's voice was firm, dismissive. You need to accept your role and support your brother. This is how our family does business. The oldest son leads. That's tradition. And I'm not changing it because you're unhappy with your position. I tried one more time. I built this company from bankruptcy to $50 million. Me. I deserve recognition for that. I deserve authority that matches my contributions. Dad stood up, signaling the conversation was over. Maybe you should take some time off to adjust your attitude. Come back when you're ready to be a team player. I left his house knowing there was no path forward within the family company. Dad had made his choice, and it wasn't me. It would never be me, no matter what I accomplished, no matter how much I sacrificed, no matter how clearly I proved my worth. Gender trumped merit in his worldview, and nothing I could do would change that. Monday morning, I activated Plan B. I hired the best employment attorney in Portland, a senior partner named Luther who specialized in executive disputes and had a reputation for winning ugly cases. His retainer was expensive, but Francine's funding commitment meant I could afford the best. Luther reviewed everything he'd compiled. The documentation of harassment, the false accusations, the systematic demotion, the gender discrimination. His assessment was blunt and confident. You have a strong case for constructive dismissal. They've created a hostile work environment with the clear intent of forcing you out. The gender discrimination angle is obvious to anyone who looks at how they've treated you versus your brother. If they want to fight your exit, well, bury them in discovery and bad publicity. But Luther recommended a different approach. Don't threaten litigation up front. Use it as leverage for negotiating a clean separation. They'll want to avoid a lawsuit as much as you do. Frame it as mutually beneficial. They release you from all restrictions. You agree not to sue for wrongful termination and discrimination. Everyone walks away without a court battle. While Luther prepared the legal framework, I took care of the business foundation. The patents for my next generation process moved through the application phase. The trademark for Cascade Sustainable Textiles was approved. I registered the business entity, opened bank accounts, set up the corporate structure. Francine's $5 million sat in an escrow account, ready to fund operations the moment I was legally clear to compete. I had quiet, careful conversations with my core team. Nothing that crossed into illegal recruiting, just honest discussions about the future. Jenna was first. I told her I was planning to leave and start my own company, that I couldn't officially offer her a position while still employed, but that I wanted her to know what was coming. I'll resign the day after you do. She didn't hesitate. I've been waiting for you to make this move. This place is toxic now, and everyone knows Trevor is driving it into the ground. Donovan said essentially the same thing. 3 senior engineers, 2 operations managers, head of client relations, all indicated they'd follow me when the time came. I also reached out to industry contacts outside the company. Rebuilding connections I'd let lapse during the years of building the business. Former supplier partners, consultants I'd worked with, people who knew my reputation and weren't influenced by Trevor's lies. One of them, a supplier partner named Garrett, offered preferential terms for my new venture. We've been hoping you'd go independent. Well, give you better pricing than what your brother's company gets. The client relationships required more delicate handling. I couldn't recruit them while still employed. That would be tortious interference and give the company grounds to sue. But I could have honest conversations about my career plans, mentioning that I was considering a change, asking what they valued most about our partnership. Diane from the athletic wear company invited me to lunch. Shed heard rumors about internal problems and wanted to understand what was happening. I was careful with my words, didn't badmouth the company or Trevor explicitly, just mentioned that I was exploring opportunities outside the family business. If you ever start your own company, call me first. Diane's tone was serious. We partnered with your company because of you. Your expertise, your integrity, your understanding of our needs. If that relationship doesn't exist anymore, we'll need to reconsider our contract. 4 other major clients expressed similar sentiments in separate conversations. They'd signed contracts with the company, but they'd built relationships with me. If I left, their loyalty would be tested in ways Trevor hadn't anticipated. I set a timeline, 30 days to get everything in position. I needed to wait for the right moment, the right catalyst that would justify my exit and make it harder for them to claim I'd left without cause. Trevor's incompetence would provide that catalyst. I was certain. He was making mistakes consistently now, emboldened by Dad's unconditional support, convinced that nothing he did could have consequences. I didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks after my meeting with Dad, Trevor announced his bold new vision for the company in a leadership meeting. He wanted to eliminate our eco-friendly focus and pursue mainstream profitability by working with conventional manufacturers who used cheaper, less sustainable processes. It was the exact opposite of everything the company had been built on. The mission that had made us successful. 2 smaller clients heard about the strategy shift and immediately expressed concerns. Our partnership is based on your commitment to sustainability. If that's changing, we need to discuss whether this relationship still makes sense. Trevor dismissed their worries in an email I saw accidentally. Well, find new clients who care more about price than environmental posturing. Environmental posturing. Head just insulted the core value proposition of every client ID brought to the company. He was about to destroy relationships worth millions because he didn't understand what WED actually built. The board meeting where Trevor would present his new vision was scheduled for the following week. Perfect timing. I prepared my resignation letter with Luther's help, a carefully worded document that laid out Trevor's misconduct without making claims I couldn't prove, expressed my concerns about the company's direction, and included an offer. I would resign and transition my responsibilities smoothly, or they could refuse my terms and face litigation for constructive dismissal, gender discrimination, and hostile work environment. The choice was theirs. The letter also made clear what I'd be taking: my patents, my client relationships, my team members who chose to follow me, all of it legally mine. I prepared a second set of documents. Evidence of Trevor's lies. Recordings of board meetings where false information was presented. Testimonials from employees about the toxic culture Head created. Financial analysis showing declining performance under his leadership. This wasn't for public consumption, but for leverage. If they wanted to fight dirty, I had ammunition. The night before the board meeting, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. 10 years of building, of sacrificing, of watching someone else take credit for my work. 10 years of being diminished and dismissed and devalued. Tomorrow, that ended. Tomorrow, I took back what was mine. I thought about Mom, wondered what she would have said about all this. She died before seeing how bad it got, before watching Dad choose Trevor over me again and again. Part of me was glad she didn't have to see it. Another part wished she'd been here to tell Dad he was wrong, to stand up for me in ways no one else had. But I didn't need anyone to stand up for me anymore. I was standing up for myself, and I was about to show them exactly what happens when you steal from someone who built the thing you're trying to take. I arrived at the office an hour before the board meeting, earlier than anyone except security. The building was quiet, that strange, peaceful feeling of a workplace before people fill it with noise and stress. I walked through the facility I'd designed, past the equipment I'd selected, through the offices I'd set up. This place was mine in every meaningful way, even if the name on the door said otherwise. I went to the conference room and placed an envelope on each board member's chair. Thick envelopes, professional, containing my resignation letter and supporting documentation. Everything they needed to understand exactly what was about to happen and what their options were. Trevor and Dad arrived together at 8:30, talking and laughing about something. They stopped when they saw the envelopes. Dad picked his up, looked at me with confusion. "What is this, Sloane?" I stayed calm, professional, kept my voice level. "That's my resignation, along with documentation of the reasons I can no longer work here. I suggest everyone read it before the meeting starts." Trevor tried to play it off. Just Sloane, being dramatic again. Probably another complaint about not getting enough recognition. But his hand shook slightly when he picked up his envelope, and I knew he understood this was different. The board members arrived, 3 men who'd rubber-stamped every decision Dad made for 20 years. They opened their envelopes and started reading. The room got very quiet except for the sound of pages turning. I watched their faces change as they read the documentation, saw the lies Trevor had told, understood the systematic harassment I'd endured. Raymond, Dad's oldest friend and the most decent of the board members, finished first. He looked at Dad with something like disappointment. "Gerald, this is serious. These allegations, if they're true, we could be facing major legal exposure." Dad's face was red, that dangerous color he got when angry. "You can't do this. You're under contract. The non-compete clause prevents you from starting a competing business." My attorney, Luther, appeared right on cue. Eid invited him to attend, knowing we'd need legal presence for this conversation. He was professional and calm, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my car. "The non-compete is unenforceable, and we're prepared to litigate that in court if necessary." Luther's voice carried the weight of someone who'd won this argument many times before. "But Miss Sloane is offering you an alternative. Accept her resignation under mutually agreeable terms, and she won't pursue legal action for the extensive documentation of wrongful demotion, hostile work environment, and gender discrimination detailed in those letters." Trevor jumped up. "This is blackmail." "You can't threaten us into letting you walk away." "It's not a threat. It's a reality check." Luther didn't raise his voice. "Your sister has documentation of systematic harassment, false accusations, and discriminatory treatment. She has recordings of board meetings where false information was presented. She has witness statements from employees. If this goes to court, it will be expensive and public, and you will lose." He laid out additional consequences. 8 key employees are prepared to resign if this isn't resolved amicably. Several major clients have expressed that their contracts are contingent on Miss Sloane's involvement. Your company is about to face significant disruption regardless of what you decide. The question is whether you want to add a lengthy, expensive, reputation-destroying lawsuit to those problems. The board members looked panicked. Raymond spoke up. "How much disruption are we talking about?" I answered, keeping my tone factual. "The clients I've personally managed represent $32 million in annual revenue. My team handles all critical operations. The proprietary process you've built your growth on, I'm the named inventor, and I've developed next-generation technology independently. If I leave on bad terms and take what's legally mine, your company will lose more than half its revenue and most of its operational capacity." Trevor exploded. "This is betrayal. Family doesn't do this to family. You're destroying Dad's legacy because you're jealous that I got promoted over you. It held it in for 10 years. Every insult, every theft of credit, every casual dismissal. Id stayed professional, taken the high road, believed that eventually merit would matter. But Trevor standing there accusing me of betrayal when Head systematically tried to erase my existence from the company I built, that broke something loose." My voice came out cold and hard. "Family? You want to talk about family? You stole credit for my work every single day for 10 years. You lied to clients about who developed our technology. You filed false HR complaints to destroy my reputation. You tried to push me out of my own company because you couldn't stand that I was better at this than you'll ever be." I turned to Dad. "And you let him. You gave him every advantage, excused every failure, promoted him over me despite having 0 qualifications because he's your son and I'm just your daughter. I built this company from bankruptcy to $50 million, and you handed him the crown for having the right chromosomes." The room was silent. Raymond looked uncomfortable. The other board members stared at the table. Trevor's face was purple with rage. Dad looked like Eid slapped him. "That's on you. I picked up my bag. Both of you chose this outcome by refusing to see what was right in front of you. Now you get to live with the consequences." I walked toward the door. Luther handed Dad a business card. "You have until end of business today to agree to settlement terms. Otherwise, we file tomorrow morning, and this becomes very public." The next 6 hours were tense negotiation. Dad tried to reduce the settlement amount. Luther kept bringing up litigation costs and the damage that discovery would do. Trevor tried to claim I couldn't take client relationships that belonged to the company. Luther pointed out the specific contract language tying those relationships to me personally. By 3 in the afternoon, we had a deal. I would receive $2.8 million, calculated based on my actual contribution to company value over 10 years. They would release me from all non-compete and non-solicitation clauses. I would get full rights to any intellectual property ID developed independently. I would resign effective immediately with a 30-day remote transition period. Dad signed the agreement with shaking hands. Trevor refused to look at me. Raymond apologized quietly as I was leaving. I should have spoken up sooner. I knew what was happening wasn't right. His regret meant nothing now, but I appreciated the acknowledgement. I walked out of that building for the last time at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was shining. Traffic was light. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning. But my entire world had shifted. Within 48 hours, 7 key employees resigned. Jenna, Donovan, everyone who'd said they'd follow me. They gave proper 2-week notices, offered to train replacements, stayed professional. Trevor tried to counteroffer with raises and promises. They all declined. They weren't leaving for money. They were leaving because they believed in the mission Eid built and didn't want to work for people who'd betrayed it. The client calls started coming within a week. Diane from the athletic wear company was first. I heard about your departure. What's your plan? I told her about Cascade Sustainable Textiles, the next generation technology I'd developed, the team I was building. She didn't hesitate. Send me the contracts. We're coming with you. 4 other major clients followed within 2 weeks. They'd all built relationships with me specifically, trusted my expertise, valued the personal attention I'd given their accounts. The contracts allowed them to terminate if primary relationship management changed, and they all exercised that right. Trevor's $50 million company became an $18 million company in the span of a month. The facilities were the same, the equipment was the same, even the name was the same. But the value had walked out the door with me, and there was nothing they could do about it. Dad tried calling me 3 days after I left. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail asking if we could talk, trying to explain his position, suggesting maybe we'd both overreacted. I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Trevor sent emails that got nastier as the reality of the situation sank in. Accused me of stealing clients, destroying the family business, betraying everyone who'd ever helped me. Luther sent a cease and desist letter reminding Trevor that harassment could reopen settlement negotiations and cost them considerably more money. The emails stopped. The company tried one last desperate move, claiming I'd violated the separation agreement by soliciting employees and clients. Luther demolished that argument in a 2-page letter pointing out that employees had resigned of their own choice and clients had exercised contractual rights to terminate. Everything was documented, everything was legal, and they had no case. 3 months after I walked out, Cascade Sustainable Textiles officially launched. The office space I chose was in Portland's Pearl District, a renovated industrial building with huge windows and exposed brick. Nothing fancy, but clean and modern and ours. I spent a week setting it up with Jenna, picking out desks and equipment, creating a workspace that felt collaborative instead of hierarchical. No corner offices, no status symbols, just a team working together towards something we all believed in. My core team of 8 from the old company formed the foundation. We hired 4 more people in the first month, carefully selecting for talent and cultural fit. Francine's $5 million in seed funding meant we could afford the best, could invest in proper equipment, could build something substantial from day one instead of bootstrapping and hoping. The patents for my next-generation dyeing process were approved 3 weeks after launch. The technology was cleaner, faster, and more cost-effective than what ID developed at the old company. I'd learned from years of refinement, understood the limitations of the first-generation process, and built something genuinely better. This time, my name was on the patents. This time, nobody could take credit for what I'd created. The first contracts were signed within a month. 4 major clients from my old company, plus 3 new ones who'd heard about my reputation and wanted to partner with someone they could trust. Year 1 revenue projections hit $18 million. We were profitable by month 6, something most startups can't claim. The industry recognition came faster than I expected. Trade publications ran features on Cascade Sustainable Textiles, on the innovative technology WED developed, on the team WED assembled. This time, my name was in the headlines. My face was on the covers. The interviews were with me, not someone taking credit for my work. It felt strange at first, being visible after years of being erased, but I got used to it. I built a company culture based on respect and merit. Everyone's contributions were acknowledged. Ideas were evaluated on their quality, not on who suggested them. We promoted based on competence, not on favoritism or gender or any other irrelevant factor. It sounds basic, but after 10 years in a toxic environment, creating something healthy felt revolutionary. By the end of year 1, WED hit $22 million in revenue and employed 30 people. Trade associations named me an emerging leader in sustainable manufacturing. We were invited to speak at industry conferences, to consult on environmental standards, to collaborate with major brands on sustainability initiatives. Everything I'd wanted to build at the family company, I was building here, but better and actually mine. Meanwhile, the old company struggled. Revenue continued declining as remaining clients left, frustrated by reduced service quality and Trevor's incompetence. He tried to copy my new process, but didn't understand the underlying chemistry well enough to replicate it. The attempts failed, wasted resources, and damaged the company's reputation further. Within 18 months of my departure, the company that had once been valued at $60 million was sold to a competitor for $8 million. Dad had to take a loan against his house to keep operations running during the worst months. The board members resigned one by one, tired of presiding over a sinking ship. Trevor ended up working as a regional sales manager for the company that bought them out, a position several levels below CEO and probably more suited to his actual abilities. Dad sent a letter 10 months after I left. Not an email, an actual handwritten letter delivered to my office. It was awkward and stilted, an apology that acknowledged he'd been wrong but didn't really grapple with why. He'd been blinded by traditional expectations, he wrote. He'd wanted to see Trevor succeed, and had convinced himself that meant ignoring my contributions. He understood now that He'd lost something irreplaceable by choosing favoritism over fairness. I read the letter twice, and then filed it away. Too little, too late. But at least it was acknowledgement. I didn't respond. Some wounds don't heal just because someone finally admits they caused them. The hardest part wasn't the business side. Building Cascade Sustainable Textiles was challenging but fulfilling, the kind of difficult that feels meaningful. The hardest part was processing the emotional fallout of family betrayal. I went to therapy for the first time in my life, talking through the hurt and anger with someone trained to help people navigate complicated relationships. My therapist helped me understand something crucial. I'd been seeking validation from people who were fundamentally unable to give it. Dad's love had always been conditional on me serving Trevor, on accepting a subordinate role, on not threatening the traditional family structure he valued. No amount of achievement would have changed that, because the problem wasn't my performance. The problem was his unwillingness to see past gender roles and birth order. Letting go of that expectation was liberating. I stopped waiting for Dad to finally recognize what I'd done, stopped hoping Trevor would acknowledge the truth, stopped needing their approval to feel worthy. My worth wasn't determined by their ability to see it. I could build something extraordinary, live a fulfilled life, find happiness completely independent of their recognition or regret. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the decade of building the company. Started actually having a social life instead of working every waking hour. Took up hiking, explored the Pacific Northwest on weekends, remembered what it felt like to exist outside of work pressure. I met someone 6 months after launching Cascade. Julian was an architect, creative and thoughtful, someone who admired my drive but also encouraged me to maintain balance. He had no interest in my money or my company, loved me for who I was as a person, not for what I'd built. We took things slow, building a relationship based on genuine connection instead of convenience or need. 2 years after leaving the family company, Cascade Sustainable Textiles hit $35 million in annual revenue. The trade association named me CEO of the Year. We expanded to 3 facilities, employed 80 people, partnered with 15 major brands. Everything the old company had been, we were becoming. But better and more sustainable and actually focused on the mission that mattered. I heard through industry contacts that the competitor who'd bought Dad's company had shut down most operations. The name still existed, but it was essentially defunct, absorbed into a larger corporation, and stripped of any independent identity. Trevor had been let go during restructuring. Dad had retired, sold his house, moved to a smaller place in the suburbs. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt sad. It didn't have to be this way. We could have built something together if they'd been willing to see me as an equal, to value contribution over gender, to judge fairly instead of favoring blindly. But they made their choices, and choices have consequences. The lesson I learned, the one that matters more than any business success, is this. You cannot force people to see your worth. You can't work hard enough, achieve big enough, sacrifice long enough to make someone value you if they've decided not to. And sometimes the people who should love you unconditionally are the ones who hurt you most deeply because you keep hoping they'll change. But your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to recognize it. You are not less capable, less worthy, less deserving because someone who should have supported you chose not to. Sometimes the only way forward is to walk away from people who diminish you, even when those people are family. Especially when those people are family. Because family doesn't get a free pass to damage you just because of shared blood. Build your own table if you're not given a seat. Create your own opportunities when doors are closed. Take what's yours and build something better somewhere else. And when they finally realize what they lost, when they try to come back with apologies and regrets, you get to decide whether their acknowledgement matters anymore. The best revenge isn't bitterness or anger. It's massive success achieved on your own terms, with people who value you, in an environment where your contributions are recognized and celebrated. It's building the life you deserve instead of fighting for scraps of recognition from people who were never going to give it. I'm 34 years old now. I run a thriving company that employs good people and does meaningful work. I have genuine relationships built on mutual respect. I wake up every day grateful for where I am instead of resentful about where I'm not. And I got here by finally understanding that some battles aren't worth winning if victory requires you to keep diminishing yourself. Walk away when you need to. Take what's yours. Build something better. And never apologize for refusing to accept less than you deserve, no matter who's asking you to stay small. That's my story. That's what happens when you finally choose yourself over people who never chose you. So tell me, have you ever had to walk away from something you built because the people around you couldn't see your value? Drop your story in the comments because I want to hear how you handled it. And if this resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because I'm going to keep sharing stories about choosing yourself and building the life you actually deserve. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to leave, that it's okay to take what's yours, that staying loyal to people who diminish you isn't noble, it's just painful. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps you find the courage to write your own ending, whatever that looks like. Stay strong, value yourself, and never let anyone convince you that being a woman means accepting less than what you've earned.